18:1. After King Saul had finished his conversation with David, David met Jonathan, the king's son, and there was an immediate bond of love between them. Jonathan swore to be his blood brother and sealed the pact by giving him his robe, sword, bow, and belt. King Saul now kept David with him and wouldn't let him return home anymore. He was Saul's special assistant, and he always carried out his assignment successfully. So Saul made him commander of his troops, an appointment that was applauded by the army and general public alike. But something had happened when the victorious Israeli army was returning home after David had killed Goliath. Women came out from all the towns along the way to celebrate and to cheer for King Saul, and were singing and dancing for joy with tambourines and cymbals. However, this was their song: Saul is slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. Well, wisdom should have said they shouldn't have did that. Okay, anyways, of course, Saul was very angry. What's this, he said to himself. They credit David with 10,000s and me with only thousands. Next, I'll be making him their king. So from that time on, King Saul kept a jealous watch on David. The very next day, in fact, a tormenting spirit from God overwhelmed Saul, and he began to rave like a madman. David began to soothe him by playing the harp, as he did whenever this happened. But Saul was fiddling with his spear. Suddenly, he hurled it at David, intending to pin him to the wall. But David jumped and escaped. This happened another time, too. For Saul was afraid of him and jealous because the Lord had left him and was now with David. Finally, Saul banned him from his presence and demoted him to the rank of captain. But the controversy put David more than ever in the public eye. David continued to succeed in everything he undertook, for the Lord was with him. When King Saul saw this, he became even more afraid of him. But all Israel and Judah loved him, for he was as one of them. One day Saul said to David, I'm ready to give you my oldest daughter, Merab, as your wife, but first you must prove yourself to be a real soldier by fighting the Lord's battles. For Saul thought to himself, I'll send him out against the Philistines and let them kill him rather than doing it myself. Who am I that I should be Who am I that I should be the king's son-in-law? David exclaimed. My father's family is nothing. But when the time arrived for the wedding, Saul married her to Adriel, a man from Mehalath, instead. In the meantime, Saul's daughter Michal had fallen in love with David, and Saul was delighted when he heard about it. Here's another opportunity to see him killed by the Philistines, Saul said to himself. But to David he said, you can be my son-in-law after all, for I will give you my youngest daughter. Then Saul instructed his men to say confidently to David that the king really liked him a lot, and that they all loved him and thought he should accept the king's proposition and become his son-in-law. But David replied, how can a poor man like me from an unknown family find enough dowry to marry the daughter of a king? When Saul's men reported this back to him, he told them, tell David that the only dowry I need is 100 dead Philistines. Vengeance on my enemies is all I want. But what Saul had in mind was that David would be killed in the fight. David was delighted to accept the offer. So before the time limit expired, he and his men went out and killed 200 Philistines and presented their foreskins to King Saul. So Saul gave Michal to him. When the king realized how much the Lord was with David and how immensely popular he was with all the people, he became even more afraid of him and grew to hate him more with every passing day. Whenever the Philistine army attacked, David was more successful against them than all the rest of Saul's officers. So David's name became very famous throughout the land. 1 Samuel 19:1. Saul now urged his aides and his son Jonathan to assassinate David. But Jonathan, because of his close friendship with David, told him what his father was planning. Tomorrow morning, he warned him, you must find a hiding place out in the fields. I'll ask my father to go out there with me, and I'll talk to him about you. And then I'll tell you everything I can find out. The next morning, as Jonathan and his father were talking together, he spoke well of David and begged him not to be against David. He's never done anything to harm you, Jonathan pleaded. He has always helped you in any way he could. Have you forgotten about the time he risked his life to kill Goliath and how the Lord brought a great victory to Israel as a result? You were certainly happy about it then. Why should you now murder an innocent man? There's no reason for it at all. Finally, Saul agreed and vowed, as the Lord lives, he shall not be killed. Afterwards, Jonathan called David and told him what had happened. Then he took David to Saul, and everything was as it had been before. War broke out shortly after that, and David led his troops against the Philistines and slaughtered many of them and put to flight their entire army. But one day as Saul was sitting in his home listening to David playing the harp, suddenly the tormenting spirit from the Lord attacked him. He had his spear in his hand and hurled it at David in an attempt to kill him. But David dodged out the way and fled into the night, leaving the spear embedded in the timber of the wall. Saul sent troops to watch David's house and kill him when he came out in the morning. If you don't get away tonight, Michal warned him, you'll be dead by morning. So he helped him get down to the ground through a window. She helped him get down to the ground through a window. Then she took an idol and put it in his bed and covered it with blankets and with its head on a pillow of goat's hair. When the soldiers came to arrest David and take him to Saul, she told him he was sick and couldn't get out of bed. Saul said to bring him in his bed then so he could kill him. But when they came to carry him out, they discovered it was only an idol. Why have you deceived me and let my enemy escape? Saul demanded of Michal. I had to, Michal replied. He threatened to kill me if I didn't help him. You lying wonder. In that way, David got away and went to Ramah to see Samuel and told him all that Saul had done to him. So Samuel took David with him to live at Naioth. When the report reached Saul that David was at Naioth in Ramah, he sent soldiers to capture him. But when they arrived and saw Samuel and the other prophets prophesying, the Spirit of God came upon them, and they also began to prophesy. When Saul heard what had happened, he sent other soldiers, but they too prophesied. The same thing happened a third time. Then Saul himself went to Ramah and arrived at the great well at Sikut. Where are you, Samuel and David? He demanded. Someone told him they were at Naioth, but on the way to Naioth, the Spirit of God came upon Saul, and he too began to prophesy. He tore off his clothes and lay naked all day and all night, prophesying with Samuel's prophets. Saul's men were incredulous. What? They exclaimed. Is Saul a prophet too? 1 Samuel 20:1. David now fled from Naioth to Ramah and found Jonathan. What have I done? He exclaimed. Why is your father so determined to kill me? That's not true, Jonathan protested. I'm sure he's not planning any such thing, for he always tells me everything he's going to do, even little things. And I know he wouldn't hide something like this from me. It just isn't so. Of course you don't know about it, David fumed. Your father knows perfectly well about our friendship. So he said to himself, I'll not tell Jonathan. Why should I hurt him? But the truth is that I'm only a step away from death. I swear it by the Lord and by your own soul. Tell me what I can do, Jonathan begged. And David replied, tomorrow is the beginning of the celebration of a new moon. Always before I've been with your father for this occasion. But tomorrow I'll hide in the field and stay there until the evening of the third day. If your father asks where I am, tell him that I have asked permission to go to Bethlehem for an annual family reunion. If he says fine, then I'll know that all is well. But if he is angry, then I know that he is planning to kill me. Do this for me as my sworn brother, else kill me yourself if I've sinned against your father. But don't betray me to him. Of course not, Jonathan exclaimed. Look, wouldn't I say so if I knew that my father was planning to kill you? Then David asked, how will I know whether or not your father is angry? Come out to the field with me, Jonathan replied, and they went out together. Then Jonathan told David, I promise by the Lord God of Israel, about this time tomorrow, the next day at the latest, I will talk to my father about you and let you know at once how he feels about you. If he is angry and wants you killed, then may the Lord kill me if I don't tell you so you can escape and live. May the Lord be with you as he used to be with my father. Oh, Lord. May the Lord be with you as he used to be with my father. And remember, you must demonstrate the love and kindness of the Lord, not only to me during my own lifetime, but also to my children after the Lord has destroyed all of your enemies. So Jonathan made a covenant with the family of David, and David swore to it with a terrible curse against himself and his descendants should he be unfaithful to his promise. But Jonathan made David swear to it again, this time by his love for him, for he loved him as much as he loved himself. Then Jonathan said, yes, they will miss you tomorrow when your place at the table is empty. By the day after tomorrow, everyone will be asking about you. So be at the hideout where you were before or over by the stone pile. I will come out and shoot 3 arrows in front of a pile as though I were shooting at a target. Then I'll send a lad to bring the arrows back. If you hear me tell him, they're on this side, then you will know that all is well and there's no trouble. But if I tell him, go further, the arrows are still ahead of you, then it will mean that you must leave immediately. And may the Lord keep us, and may the Lord make us keep our promises to each other, for he has witnessed them. So David hid himself in the field. When the new moon celebration began, the king sat down to eat at his usual place against the wall. Jonathan sat opposite him, and Abner was sitting beside Saul, but David's place was empty. Saul didn't say anything about it that day, for he supposed that something happened so that David was ceremonially impure. Yes, surely that must be it. But when his place was still empty the next day, Saul asked Jonathan, why hasn't David been here for dinner either yesterday or today? He asked me if I could go to Bethlehem and take part in the family celebration, Jonathan replied. His brother demanded that he be there, so I told him to go ahead. Saul boiled with rage. You fool, he yelled at him. Do you think I don't know what you want this? Do you think I don't know that you want this son of a nobody to be king in your place, shaming yourself and your mother? As long as that fellow is alive, you'll never be king. Now go and get him so I can kill him. But what has he done? Jonathan demanded. Why should he be put to death? Then Saul hurled his spear at Jonathan, intending to kill him. So at last Jonathan realized that his father really meant it when he said, David must die. Jonathan left the table in fierce anger and refused to eat all that day, for he was crushed by his father's shameful behavior toward David. The next morning he agreed, as agreed, Jonathan went out into the field and took a young boy with him to gather his arrows. Start running, he told the boy, so you can find the arrows as I shoot them. So the boy ran, and Jonathan shot an arrow beyond. When the boy had almost reached the arrow, Jonathan shouted, the arrow is still ahead of you. Hurry, hurry, don't wait. So the boy quickly gathered up the arrows and ran back to his master. Of course, he didn't understand what Jonathan meant. Only Jonathan and David knew. Then Jonathan gave his bow and arrows to the boy and told him to take them back to the city. As soon as he was gone, David came out from where he had been hiding near the south edge of the field. Both of them were crying as they said goodbye, especially David. At last, Jonathan said to David, cheer up, for we have entrusted each other and each other's children into God's hands forever. So they parted, David going away and Jonathan returning to the city. 1 Samuel chapter 21. David went to the city of Nob to see Ahimelech the priest. Ahimelech trembled when he saw him. Why are you alone, he asked. Why is no one with you? The king has sent me on a private matter, David lied. The king has sent me on a private matter, David lied. He told me not to tell anybody why I'm here. I've told my men where to meet me later. Now, what is there to eat? Give me 5 loaves of bread or anything else you can. We don't have any regular bread, the priest replied, but there is only the holy bread, which I guess you can if only your young men have not slept with any women for a while. Rest assured, David replied, I have never let my men run wild when they are on an expedition. And since they stay clean even on ordinary trips, how much more so on this one? So since there was no other food available, the priest gave him the holy bread, the bread of the presence that was placed before the Lord in the tabernacle. It had just been replaced that day with fresh bread. Incidentally, Doeg, the Edomite, Saul's chief herdsman, was there at the time for ceremonial purification. An Edomite. David asked Ahimelech if he had a spear or sword he could use. The king's business required haste, and I left in such a rush that I came without a weapon, David exclaimed. Well, the priest replied, I have the sword of Goliath, the Philistine, the fellow you killed in the valley of Elah. It is wrapped in a cloth in the clothes closet. Take that if you want it, for there's nothing else here. Just the thing, David replied, give it to me. Then David hurried on, for he was fearful of Saul, and went to King Achish of Gath. But Achish's officers weren't happy about his being there. Isn't he the top leader of Israel, they asked? Isn't he the one that people honor at their dances, singing, Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s? David heard these comments and was afraid of what King Achish might do to him. So he pretended to be insane. He scratched on the doors and let his spittle flow down his beard, until finally King Achish said to his men, must you bring me a madman? We already have enough of them around here. Should such a fellow as this be my guest? 1 Samuel 22:1. So David left Gath and escaped to the cave of Adullam, where his brothers and other relatives soon joined him. Then others began coming, those who were in any kind of trouble, such as being in debt or merely discontented, until David was the leader of about 400 men. Later, David went to Mizpah in Moab to ask permission of the king for his father and mother to live there under royal protection until David knew what God was going to do for him. They stayed in Moab during the entire period when David was living in the cave. One day the prophet Gad told David to leave the cave and return to the land of Judah. So David went to the forest of Hereb. News of his arrival in Judah soon reached Saul. He was in Gibeah at the time, sitting beneath an oak tree, playing with his spear, surrounded by his officers. Listen here, you men of Benjamin, Saul exclaimed when he heard the news. Has David promised you fields and vineyards and commissions in his army? Is that why you are against me? For not one of you has ever told me that my son is on David's side. You're not even sorry for me. Think of it, my own son encouraging David to come and kill me. Then Doeg the Edomite, who was standing there with Saul's men, spoke up. When I was at Nob, he said, I saw David talking to Ahimelech the priest. Ahimelech consulted the Lord to find out what David should do, and then gave him food and the sword of Goliath the Philistine. King Saul immediately summoned Ahimelech and all his family and all the other priests at Nob. When they arrived, Saul shouted to him, Listen to me, you son of a Hittub. What is it? Quavered Ahimelech. Why have you and David conspired against me? Saul demanded. Why did you give him food and a sword and talk to God for him? Why did you encourage him to revolt against me and to come here and attack me? But sir, Ahimelech replied, is there anyone among all your servants who is as faithful as David, your son-in-law? Why, he is the captain of your body. Oh, the wrong words, Ahimelech. Why is he is the captain of your bodyguard and a highly honored member of your own household. This was certainly not the first time I had consulted God for him. It's unfair for you to accuse me and my family in this matter, for we knew nothing about any plot against you. You shall die, Ahimelech, along with your entire family, the king shouted. He ordered the bodyguards, kill these priests, for they are all allies and conspirators with David. They knew he was running away from me, but they didn't tell me. But the soldiers refused to harm the clergy. Then the king said to Doeg, you do it. So Doeg turned on them and killed them, 85 priests in all wearing their priestly robes. Then he went to Nob, the city of the priests, and killed the priests' families, men, women, children, and babies, and all the oxen, donkeys, and sheep. Only Abiathar, one of the sons of Ahimelech, escaped and fled to David. When he told him what Saul had done, David exclaimed, I knew it. When I saw Doeg there, I knew he would tell Saul. Now I've caused the death of all of your father's family. Stay here with me, and I'll protect you with my own life. Any harm to you will be over my dead body. 1 Samuel 23:1. One day news came to David that the Philistines were at Keilah robbing the threshing floors. David asked the Lord, shall I go attack them? Yes, go and save Keilah, the Lord told him. But David's men said, we're afraid, even here in Judah. We certainly don't want to go to Keilah to fight against the whole Philistine army. David asked the Lord again, and the Lord replied, go down to Keilah, for I will help you to conquer the Philistines. They went to Keilah and slaughtered the Philistines, confiscated their cattle, so the people of Keilah were saved. Abiathar the priest went to Keilah with David, taking his ephod with him to get answers for David from the Lord. Saul soon learned that David was at Keilah. Good, he exclaimed, we've got him now. God has delivered him to me, for he has trapped himself in a walled city. So Saul mobilized his entire army to march to Keilah and besiege David and his men. But David learned of Saul's plan and told Abiathar the priest to bring the ephod and asked the Lord what to do. O Lord God of Israel, David said, I've heard that Saul is planning to come and destroy Keilah because I am here. Will the men of Keilah surrender me to him? And will Saul actually come as I have heard? O Lord God of Israel, please tell me. And the Lord said, he will come. And will these men of Keilah betray me to Saul? David persisted, and the Lord replied, yes, they will betray you. So David and his men, about 600 of them now, left Keilah and began roaming the countryside. Word soon reached Saul that David had escaped, and he didn't go there after all. David now lived in the wilderness caves in the hill country of Ziph. One day near Horesh, he received the news that Saul was on the way to Ziph to search out for him and kill him. Saul hunted him day after day, but the Lord didn't let him find him. Prince Jonathan now went to find David. He met him at Horesh, encouraged him in his faith in God. Don't be afraid, Jonathan reassured him. My father will never find you. You're going to be the king of Israel, and I will be next to you, as my father is well aware. Wow. So the two of them renewed their pact of friendship, and David stayed at Horesh while Jonathan returned home. Jonathan could have been the king himself. But now the men of Ziph went to Saul in Gibeah and betrayed David to him. We know where he's hiding, they said. He's in the caves of Horesh and Halkeliah Hill, down in the southern part of the wilderness. Come on down, sir. We'll catch him for you, and your fondest wish will be fulfilled. Well, praise the Lord, Saul said. At last, someone has had pity on me. Go and check again to be sure where he is staying and who has seen him there, for I know that he's very crafty. Discover his hiding places, and then come back and give me a more definite report. Then I will go with you. And if he is in the area at all, I'll find him if I have to search every inch of the entire land. So the men of Ziph returned home, but when David heard that Saul was on his way to Ziph, he and his men went even further into the wilderness of Maon in the south of the desert. But Saul followed them there. He and David were now on opposite sides of a mountain. As Saul and his men began to close in, David tried his best to escape, but it was no use. But just then a message reached Saul that the Philistines were raiding Israel again. So Saul quit the chase and returned to the Philistines. Ever since that time, the place where David was camped has been called the Rock of Escape. David then went to live in the caves of En-Gedi, the Rock of Escape. Jesus is my rock of escape. 1 Samuel chapter 24, verse 1. After Saul's return from his battle with the Philistines, he was told that David had gone into the wilderness of En-Gedi. So he took 3,000 special troops and went to search for him among the rocks and the wild goats of the desert. At the place where the road passes some sheepfolds, Saul went into a cave to go to the bathroom, but as it happened, David and his men were hiding in the cave. Now's your time, David's men whispered to him. Today is the day the Lord was talking about when he said, I will certainly put Saul into your power to do with him as you wish. Then David crept forward and quietly slit off the bottom of Saul's robe, but then his conscience began bothering him. I shouldn't have done it, he said to his men. It's a serious sin to attack God's chosen king in any way. These words of David persuaded his men not to kill Saul. After Saul left the cave and had gone on his way, David came and shouted after him, "My lord the king." And when Saul looked around, David bowed low before him. Then he shouted to Saul, "Why do you listen to the people who say I'm trying to harm you? This very day you have seen it isn't true. For the Lord placed you at my mercy back there in the cave. And some of my men told me to kill you, but I spared you. For I said I will never harm him. He is the Lord's chosen king. See what I have in my hand? It's the hem of your robe. I cut it off, but I didn't kill you. Doesn't this convince you that I'm not trying to harm you and that I've not sinned against you, even though you've been hunting my life? The Lord will decide between us. Perhaps he will kill you for what you are trying to do to me, but I will never harm you." What? As the old proverb says, wicked is as wicked does. But despite your wickedness, I will not touch you. And who is the king of Israel trying to catch anyway? Should he spend his time chasing one who is as worthless as a dead dog or a flea? May the Lord judge to which one of us is right and punish whichever one of us is guilty. He is my lawyer and defender. Thank you, Jesus. He will rescue me from your power. Saul called back, "Is it really you, my son David?" Then he began to cry. "Oh, you hypocrite, big old rusty guy up here crying, Lord." And he said to David, "You are a better man than I am, for you have repaid me good for evil. Yes, you've been wonderfully kind to me today, for when the Lord delivered me into your hand, you didn't kill me. Who else in all the world would let his enemy get away when he had seen his power? May the Lord reward you well for the kindness you have shown me today. Now I realize that you are surely going to be king, and Israel shall be yours to rule. Oh, swear to me by the Lord that when this happens, you will not kill my family and destroy my line of descendants." So David promised, and Saul went home, but David and his men went back into their cave. 1 Samuel 25:1. Shortly afterwards, Samuel died, and all Israel gathered for his funeral and buried him in his family plot at Ramah. Meanwhile, David went down to the wilderness of Paran. A wealthy man from Maon owned a sheep ranch there near the village of Carmel. He had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. And I was at his ranch at this time for the sheep herding. His name was Nabal, and his wife, a beautiful and very intelligent woman, who was named Abigail. But the man who was a descendant of Caleb was uncouth, churlish, stubborn, and ill-mannered. When David heard that Nabal was shearing his sheep, he sent 10 of his young men to Carmel to give him this message: "May God prosper you and your family, multiply everything you own. I'm told that you're shearing your sheep and goats. While your shepherds have lived among us, we have never harmed them nor stolen anything from them the whole time they've been in Carmel. Ask your young men, and they will tell you whether or not this is true. Now, I've sent my men to ask for a little contribution from you, for we have come at a happy time of holiday. Please give us a present at whatever is at hand." The young men gave David's message to Nabal and waited for his reply. "Who is this fellow David?" he sneered. "Who does this son of Jesse think he is? There are a lot of servants these days who run away from their masters. Should I take my bread and my water and my meat that I have slaughtered and my shearers and give it to a gang who comes from God knows where?" So David's messengers returned and told him what Nabal had said. "Get your swords," was David's reply as he strapped on his own. 400 of them started off with David, and 200 remained behind to guard the gear. Meanwhile, one of Nabal's men went and told Abigail. "David sent men from the wilderness to talk to our master, but he insulted them and railed at them. But David's men were very good to us, and we never suffered any harm from them. In fact, day and night, they were like a wall of protection to us and the sheep, and nothing was stolen from us the whole time they were there with us. You'd better think fast, for there's going to be trouble for our master and his whole family. He's such a stubborn lout that no one can even talk to him. Lord have mercy." Then Abigail hurriedly took 200 loaves of bread, 2 barrels of wine, 5 dressed sheep, 2 bushels of roasted grain, 100 raisin cakes, and 200 fig cakes, and packed them onto donkeys. "Go on ahead," she said to her young men, "and I will follow." But she didn't tell her husband what she was doing, and as she was riding down the trail on her donkey, she met David coming toward her. David had been saying to himself, "A lot of good it did for us to help this fellow. We protected his flocks in the wilderness so that not one thing was lost or stolen. But he has repaid me bad for good. All I get is trouble and insults. May God curse me, even if one of his men remains alive by tomorrow morning." When Abigail saw David, she quickly dismounted and bowed low before him. "I accept all the blame in this, my lord, in this matter. Please listen to what I want to say. Nabal is a bad-tempered boor." Ooh, there's some names you all are calling this man. Nabal is a bad-tempered boor. But please don't pay attention to what he said. He is a fool, just like his name means. But I didn't see the messengers that you sent. Sir, since the Lord has kept you from murdering and taking vengeance into your own hands, I pray by the life of God and by your own life too, that all your enemies shall be cursed as Nabal is. And now, here's a present I brought to you and your young men. Forgive me for my boldness in coming out here. The Lord will reward you with eternal royalty for your descendants and for your fighting his battles, and you will never do wrong throughout your entire life. Even when you are chased by those who seek your life, you're safe in the care of the Lord your God, just as though you were safe inside his purse. But the lives of your enemies shall disappear like stones from a sling. When the Lord has done all good things he promised you and has made you king of Israel, you won't want the conscience of a murderer. You took the law into his own hands. And when the Lord has done these great things for you, please remember me. David replied to Abigail, bless the Lord God of Israel, who has sent you to meet me today. Thank God for your good sense. Bless you for keeping me from murdering the man and carrying out vengeance with my own hands. For I swear by the Lord, the God of Israel, who has kept me from hurting you, that if you had not come out here and meet me, not one of Nabal's men would be alive tomorrow morning. Then David accepted gifts and told her to return home without fear, for he would not kill her husband. When she arrived home, she found Nabal had thrown a big party. He was roaring drunk. So she didn't tell him anything about her meeting with David until the next morning. By that time, he was sober, and when his wife told him what had happened, he had a stroke and lay paralyzed about 10 days and then died, for the Lord killed him. When David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, praise the Lord. God has paid back Nabal and kept me from doing it myself. He has received his punishment for his sin. Y'all are terrible. Then David wasted no time in sending messengers to Abigail to ask her to become his wife. This is your second wife? When the messengers arrived at Carmel and told her why they had come, she readily agreed to his request. Quickly getting ready, she took along 5 of her serving girls as attendants, mounted her donkey, and followed the men back to David, so she became his wife. David also married Ahinoam, another wife, from Jezreel. King Saul, meanwhile, had forced David's wife, Michal, Saul's daughter, to marry a man from Galem named Paltai, the son of Laish. The book of 1 Samuel, chapter 26. Now the men of Ziph came back to Saul at Gibeah to tell him that David had returned from the wilderness and was hiding on Hakaliah Hill. So Saul took his elite corps of 3,000 troops and went to hunt him down. Saul encamped along the road at the edge of the wilderness where David was hiding. But David knew of Saul's arrival and sent out spies to watch his movements. David slipped over to Saul's camp one night to look around. King Saul and General Abner were sleeping inside a ring formed by the slumbering soldiers. Any volunteers to go down there with me? David asked Ahimelech, the Hittite, and Abishai, Joab's brother, the son of Zeruiah. I'll go with you, Abishai replied. So David and Abishai went to Saul's camp and found him asleep with his spear in the ground beside his head. God has put your enemy within your power at this time, Abishai whispered to David. Let me go and put that spear through him. I'll pin him to death with it. I'll not need to strike a second time. No, David said, don't kill him, for who can remain innocent after attacking the Lord's chosen king? Surely God will strike him down someday, or he will die in battle or of old age. But God forbid that I should kill the man that he has chosen to be king. But I'll tell you what, we'll take his spear and his jug of water and then get out of here. So David took the spear and jug of water, and they got away without anyone seeing them, even waking up, because the Lord had put them sound asleep. They climbed a mountain slope opposite the camp where they were at a safe distance. Then David shouted to Abner and Saul, wake up, Abner. Who is it? Abner demanded. Well, Abner, you're a great fellow, aren't you? David taunted. Where in all Israel is there anyone as wonderful? So why haven't you guarded your master, the king, when someone came to kill him? This isn't good at all. I swear by the Lord that you ought to die for your carelessness. Where is the king's spear and jug of water that was beside his head? Look and see. Saul recognized David's voice. Is that you, my son, David? And David replied, yes, sir, it is. Why are you chasing me? What have I done to you? What is my crime? If the Lord has stirred you up against me, then let him accept my peace offering. But if this is simply a scheme of man, then may he be cursed by God. For you have driven me out from my home so that I can't be with the Lord's people. And you have sent me away to worship heathen gods. Must I die on foreign soil, far from the presence of Jehovah? Why should the king of Israel come out to hunt my life like a partridge in the mountains? Then Saul confessed, I've done wrong. Come back home, my son. I'll no longer try to harm you, for you saved my life today. I've been a fool and very, very wrong. And I wouldn't trust Saul. Here is your spear, sir, David replied. Let one of your young men come over and get it. The Lord gives his own reward for doing good and being loyal. And I refuse to kill you even when the Lord placed you in my power. Now may the Lord save my life, even as I have saved yours today. May he rescue me from all my troubles. And Saul said to David, blessings on you, my son David. You shall do heroic deeds and be a great conqueror. Then David went away and Saul returned home. 1 Samuel chapter 27. But David kept thinking to himself, someday Saul is going to get me. I'll try my luck among the Philistines until Saul gives up and quit hunting for me. Then I will finally be safe again. So David took 600 men and their families to live at Gath under the protection of King Achash. He had his 2 wives with him, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail of Carmel, Nabal's wife. Word soon reached Saul that David had fled to Gath so he could quit hunting for him. One day David said to Achish, my lord, if it's all right with you, we would rather live in one of the country towns instead of here in the royal city. So Achash gave him Ziklag, which still belongs to the kings of Judah to this day. And they lived there among the Philistines for a year and 4 months. He and his men spent their time raiding the Gershonites, the Girzites, the Amalekites, people who had lived near Shur along the road to Egypt ever since ancient times. They didn't leave one person alive in the villages. They hit and took for themselves the sheep, oxen, donkeys, camels, and clothing before returning to their homes. Where did you make your raid today? Achash would ask, and David would reply, against the south of Judah, the people of Jerahmeel and the Kenites. No one was left alive to come to Gath and tell where he had really been. This happened again and again while he was living among the Philistines. Achash believed David and thought that the people of Israel must hate him bitterly by now. Now he will have to stay here and serve me forever, the king thought. 1 Samuel chapter 28, verse 1. About that time, the Philistines mustered their armies for another war with Israel. Come help us fight, King Achash said to David and his men. Good, David agreed. You will soon see what help we can be to you. If you are, then you be my personal party guard for my life, Achash told him. Meanwhile, Samuel had died and all Israel had mourned for him. He was buried in Ramah, his hometown. King Saul had banned all mediums and wizards from the land of Israel. The Philistines set up their camp at Shunem, and Saul and the armies of Israel went to Gilboa. When Saul saw the vast army of the Philistines, he was frantic with fear and asked the Lord what he should do. But the Lord refused to answer him, either by dreams or by Urim or by the prophets. Saul then instructed his aides to go find a medium so that they could ask her what to do. And they found one at Endor. Saul disguised himself by wearing ordinary clothing instead of his royal robes. He went to the woman's home at night, accompanied by 2 of his men. I've got to talk to a dead man, he pleaded. Will you bring his spirit up? Are you trying to get me killed? The woman demanded. You know that Saul has had all the mediums and fortune tellers executed. You're spying on me. But Saul took a solemn oath that he wouldn't betray her. Finally, the woman said, well, who do you want me to bring up? Bring up Samuel, Saul replied. When the woman saw Samuel, she screamed, you deceived me. You are Saul. Don't be frightened, the king told her. What do you see? I see a specter coming up out of the earth, she said. What does he look like? He's an old man wrapped in a robe. Saul realized that it was Samuel and bowed low before him. Why have you disturbed me by bringing me back? Samuel asked Saul. Because I'm in deep trouble, he replied. The Philistines are at war with us, and God has left me and won't reply by prophets or dreams. So I've called for you to ask you what to do. But Samuel replied, why ask me if the Lord has left you and has become your enemies? He has done just as he said he would and has taken the kingdom from you and given it to your rival David. All this has come upon you because you did not obey the Lord's instructions when he was angry with Amalek. What's more, the entire Israeli army will be routed and destroyed by the Philistines tomorrow, and you and your sons will be here with me. Saul now fell full length upon the ground, paralyzed with fright because of Samuel's words. He was also faint with hunger, for he had not eaten nothing all day. When the woman saw how distraught he was, she said, Sir, I obeyed your command at the risk of my life. Now do what I say, and let me give you something to eat so you regain your strength for the trip back. But he refused. The men who were with him added their pleas to that of the woman until he finally yielded and got up and sat on the bed. The woman had been fattening the calf, so she hurried and killed it and kneaded dough and baked unleavened bread. So she brought the meal to the king and his men, and they ate, and they went out into the night. 1 Samuel chapter 29. The Philistine army now mobilized at Aphek, and the Israelis camped at the springs in Jezreel. As the Philistine captains were leading out their troops by battalions and companies, David and his men marched at the rear with King Achash. But the Philistine commanders demanded, what are these Israelis doing here? And King Achash told them, this is David, the runaway servant of King Saul of Israel. He's been with me for years, and I've never found one fault in him since he arrived. But the Philistine leaders were angry. Send them back, they demanded. They aren't going into battle with us. They'll turn against us. Is there any better way for him to reconcile himself with his master than by turning against us in the battle? This is the same man the women of Israel sang about in their dances. Saul is slain his thousands and David his 10,000s. So Achash summoned David and his men. I swear by the Lord, he told him, you are some of the finest men I've ever met, and I think you should go with us. But my commanders say no. Please don't upset them, but go back quietly. What have I done to deserve this treatment? David demanded. Why can't I fight your enemies? But Achash insisted, as far as I'm concerned, you're perfect as an angel of God. But my commanders are afraid to have you with them in the battle. Now get up early in the morning and leave as soon as it is light. So David headed back into the land of the Philistines, where the Philistine army went to Jezreel. 1 Samuel chapter 30. 3 days later, when David and his men arrived home at the city of Ziklag, they found that the Amalekites had raided the city and burned it to the ground, carrying off all the women and children. As David and his men looked around at the ruins and realized what had happened to their families, they wept until they could weep no more. David's 2 wives, Ahinoam and Abigail, were among those who had been captured. David was seriously worried, for in their bitter grief for their children, his men began to talk of killing him. But David took strength from the Lord. Then he said to Abiathar the priest, bring me the ephod. So Abiathar brought it. David asked the Lord, shall I chase after them? Will I catch them? And the Lord told him, yes, go after them. You will recover everything that was taken from you. So David and his 600 men set out after the Amalekites. When they reached Bezor brook, 200 of the men were too exhausted to cross, but the other 400 kept going. Along the way, they found an Egyptian youth in a field and brought him to David. He had not had anything to drink, or eat or drink for 3 days and nights. So they gave him part of a fig cake, 2 clusters of raisins, and some water, and his strength soon returned. Who are you and where do you come from? David asked him. I'm an Egyptian, the servant of an Amalekite, he replied. My master left me behind 3 days ago because I was sick. We were on our way from raiding the Cherethites in Negeb and had raided the south of Judah and the land of Caleb and had burned Ziklag. Can you tell me where they went? David asked. The young man replied, if you swear by God's name that you will not kill me or give me back to my master, then I will guide you to them. So he led them to the Amalekite encampment. They were spread out across the fields, eating and drinking and dancing with joy because of the vast amount of loot they had taken from the Philistines and from the men of Judah. David and his men rushed in among them and slaughtered them all that night and the entire next day until evening. No one escaped except 400 young men who had fled on camels. David got everything back that had been taken. The men recovered their families and all their belongings, and David rescued his 2 wives. His troops rounded up all the flocks and herds and drove them on ahead of them. These are yours personally as your reward, they told David. When they reached Bezor brook, the 200 men who had been too exhausted to go on, David greeted them joyfully. But some of the ruffians among David's men declared, they didn't go with us, so they can't have any of the loot. Give them their wives and their children and tell them to be gone. But David said, no, my brothers, the Lord has kept us safe and helped us defeat the enemy. Do you think that anyone will listen to you when you talk like this? We share and share alike, those who go to battle and those who guard the equipment. From then on, David made this the law for all of Israel, and it is still followed. When he arrived at Ziklag, he sent part of the loot to the elders of Judah. Here is a present for you taken from the Lord's enemies, he wrote them. The gifts were sent to the elders in the following cities where David and his men had been: Bethel, South Ramoth, Jattar, Ariah, Shipmoth, Eshitemoah, Rascal, the city of the Jerahmeelites, the cities of the Kenites, Hormah, Barashan, Atak, Hebron. 1 Samuel chapter 31. Meanwhile, the Philistines had begun the battle against Israel, and the Israelis fled from them and were slaughtered wholesale on Mount Gilboa. The Philistines closed in on Saul and killed his sons, Jonathan, Abinadab, Malchishua. Then the archers overtook Saul and wounded him badly. He groaned to his armor-bearer, kill me with your sword before these heathen Philistines capture me and torture me. But his armor-bearer was afraid to. So Saul took his own sword and fell upon the point of the blade, and it pierced him through. When his armor-bearer saw that he was dead, he fell upon his sword and died with him. So Saul, his armor-bearer, his 3 sons, and his troops died together that same day. When the Israelis on the other side of the valley and beyond the Jordan heard that their comrades had fled and that Saul and his sons were dead, they abandoned their cities, and the Philistines lived in them. The next day, when the Philistines went out to strip the dead, they found the bodies of Saul and his 3 sons on Mount Gilboa. They cut off Saul's head and stripped off his armor and sent the wonderful news of Saul's death to their idols and to the people throughout their land. His armor was placed in the temple of Ashtaroth, and his body was fastened to the wall of Bethshan. But when the people of Jabesh Gilead heard what the Philistines had done, warriors from that town traveled all night to Bethshan and took down the bodies of Saul and his sons from the wall and brought them to Jabesh, where they cremated them. Then they buried the remains beneath the oak tree at Jabesh and fasted for 7 days. This is the word of the Lord.